The first light of winter crept across the mountains like a tired pilgrim, pale and unsure, touching every ridge as if asking permission before it settled. Smoke drifted weakly from the chimney of the Boone cabin, thin, wandering, almost embarrassed to be seen. Inside, the wooden floorboards lay cold as river stones. And on those boards, half covered by a torn blanket, lay Alara Boone, breath trembling, ribs bruised, eyelids fluttering like they were too heavy for her heart to lift. Her little girl, Mira, knelt close beside her, tiny hands pressed to her mother's cheek as if she could warm her back into the world. "Mama, please wake up," she whispered, her voice the smallest sound in that frozen morning. The wind rattled the loose shutters. It sounded like a prayer said too late. Alara didn't respond. The night before had been a blur of fists and curses. Elias Boone shouting about entitlement, about property, about how a widow had no right to keep a deed her husband left her. Martha, his wife, had watched with stiff lips and cold eyes, jealousy and bitterness tied tight around her like a girdle. The blows came fast, hard, punishment delivered by people who smiled in church pews. Then they took food, blankets, everything useful, and left her on the floor with her daughter and a winter wind slipping through every crack in the wall. It wasn't rage that guided them. It was calculation. They expected nature to finish what they had started. Alara drifted in and out of darkness. Occasionally a memory surfaced. Her husband's laughter, Myra's first steps, a warm summer day before life had teeth. Then everything blurred again. Outside, snow piled against the cabin door. No neighbors lived nearby. No one walked the ridge this time of year. The world was wide, empty, and quiet. Too quiet for a woman fading into the boards. But far up the slope, cutting through that silence, a single cry rode the wind. A child's cry. Jedediah Jed Crowther paused mid-stride, a pelt bag slung over one shoulder. He was a mountain man in the truest sense, broad-shouldered, slow-moving, a quiet shadow in the pines. He lived alone by choice, his cabin tucked into a fold of the ridge, visited only by deer and memories he never spoke of. But this cry, it wasn't the sound of a creature. It was sharp, trembling, carrying fear. He turned toward it before his mind even decided. The snow deepened near the Boone cabin, rising halfway up the broken steps. The door hung crooked. Jed heard the weak sound again and pushed it open. Inside, Mira looked up with red-rimmed eyes. She didn't scream at the sight of the stranger. Something in Jed's presence, steady and silent, halted her fear. She only pointed at her mother. Jed knelt. Alara's skin felt cold as river water, her pulse thin. He didn't say much. He rarely did. He simply gathered her into his arms, careful as if she were made of brittle porcelain and moonlight. She didn't stir, didn't flinch. Her body was limp, trusting by necessity, not choice. "Get your coat, little one," he murmured, his voice low as distant thunder. Mira obeyed, so quickly it made his heart ache. The journey to his cabin took time. Snow stung Jed's face. Alara's breath fluttered against his chest, fading, returning, fading again. Mira walked beside him, gripping his sleeve every few steps, afraid he would disappear with her mother into the trees. Jed's cabin was warmer, fir logs stacked high, a fire always burning. He pushed the door open with his shoulder and laid Alara on his bed, a space no one had touched in years except him. He didn't touch her bruises at first. He heated broth, filled the cabin with the scent of pine smoke and simmering soup. He wrapped Mira in a thick fur, then returned to Alara and checked her ribs carefully, his hand steady, gentle. Her breath caught at one touch, just a flicker of pain, but she didn't wake. Jed wasn't a healer, but he knew survival. He'd seen injuries from falls, accidents, bar fights. He cleaned her wounds, bound what he could, warmed stones to slip under the blankets. All the while he didn't speak. Words felt intrusive in a moment like this. Mira watched him with wide eyes. "Is Mama gonna die?" she whispered. Jed paused. He met the child's gaze, his own eyes a deep river color, dark, quiet, but holding something steady. "Not if I can help it." Outside, the world kept turning. Up in town, Old Hattie Mills squinted from her porch as she saw Jed riding earlier, carrying an unconscious woman. Gossip lit like dry grass. Hattie's voice, sharp as a crow's beak, traveled from porch to saloon to church steps. A woman, unconscious, and that Crowther man took her to the mountain. Lord knows what he's doing with her. Half the town feared Jed because he lived alone. The other half feared him because he didn't apologize for solitude. By afternoon, the whispers reached Elias. His face flushed red with rage. Not regret, not worry, but the fear of being exposed. She should have died in that cabin, he spat. And so the danger began to gather like storm clouds around the mountain. Back on the ridge, Alara finally stirred. Her eyelids twitched, breath deepened. The firelight painted soft gold along the walls, across the braided rugs, across Jed's calloused hands resting loosely on his knees as he watched over her. When she tried to sit, pain tore through her and she gasped. Jed quickly looked away, turning his face toward the window to give her privacy, an instinct as natural to him as breathing. A woman waking hurt didn't need a man's stare. Mira scrambled into her mother's arms, crying in relief. Alara held her daughter tightly, wincing but refusing to let go. She whispered, "Where are we?" "Safe," Jed answered without turning. "My cabin." Snow was coming in fast. You wouldn't have survived the night. He kept his distance. Alara felt the space he deliberately created, as if protection wasn't something he'd force, but something he'd guard from afar. Shame prickled her skin. It always did after a beating. Shame mixed with fear, guilt, confusion. But beneath those emotions was something unexpected, a sense of safety she hadn't felt in a long time. Jed set a cup of warm tea by her elbow. Just a quiet gesture. Alara murmured, "Thank you," her voice thin as frost. He nodded once. Throughout the day, she watched him through half-opened eyes, how he moved slowly to avoid startling her, how he chopped wood in a steady rhythm, how he built warmth into the room without a single wasted motion. Inside her, something fragile shifted. Not love, not yet, but trust, the faintest thread of it. Later, when she drifted into a shallow sleep, Jed stepped outside to check the traps he'd set. Snow had fallen deeper since morning, but fresh footprints, large, heavy, cut across the lower path. Someone had been near. He followed them until they ended at a tree, the imprint of a boot heel pressed deep, as if the man stood watching the cabin for a long time. Jed's jaw tightened. Down in town, Elias Boone had already reached the sheriff's office, demanding Alara be returned to him. "She's family. That man stole her," he shouted. But Sheriff Tobias Granger frowned. He'd seen Elias's temper too many times. Something in his gut twisted with unease. Back on the mountain, Jed scanned the ridgeline. One distant rifle shot echoed through the valley. Warning, threat, or accident, he couldn't tell. He stepped back into the cabin, his expression hiding a storm. Alara was awake again, Mira asleep beside her. Jed's gaze rested on her only for a moment, long enough for her to sense the danger tightening around them. For the first time since her husband's death, Alara felt the stirrings of something she had forgotten she possessed. Hope that someone might stand between her and the cruelty chasing her. Jed closed the door gently behind him, his broad frame filling the doorway for a breath, a silent promise in the way he stood. He wouldn't let anyone hurt her again. Outside, the mountain wind rose like a warning. Winter was far from over, and neither were the men who wished her gone. The storm deepened overnight. Snow thick as wool dropped from the sky, covering the tracks around Jed's cabin and quieting the world until it felt almost sacred. The fire burned steady. Mira slept curled against her mother's side, her small breaths warm against Alara's arm. And Jed, who had stayed awake most of the night listening for approaching boots, finally allowed himself a moment to sit. Alara watched him from the bed. Her body hurt, but the pain had begun to feel separate from her, like an old bruise fading in a dream. This cabin, this quiet, sturdy place, felt safer than any she had ever known. The wooden walls, the gentle crackle of fire, and Jed's silent presence created a strange warmth she didn't know how to name. He didn't ask questions. He didn't push for explanations or thanks. He moved through the morning with deliberate care, heating water, checking her bandages, placing two small wooden animal carvings near Mira for when she woke. Every action came without expectation. "Why are you doing all this?" Alara asked softly, her voice still unsteady. Jed paused only a moment. "You needed help, but we're strangers." "Maybe," he said, eyes on the kettle, "but strangers need help too." His words wrapped around her like a quilt, plain, honest, unadorned. It had been years since anyone had done something for her without wanting something in return. As her strength slowly returned, she began to move a little more. One day, she managed to sit up. The next, she stood for a moment with Jed's steady hand hovering near her back, close enough to catch her, far enough not to cage her. She often found him carving small pieces of pine, lost in thought. She watched him through the steam rising from her cup, wondering how someone so quiet could make the world feel less frightening. Outside, however, fear was gathering. Back in town, Hattie Mills was fussing on her porch again, whispering to passersby that Alara Boone's gotten herself under that mountain man's roof like a fox in a henhouse. Elias heard each word and grew angrier. The idea that Alara had survived, that she might be healing, reclaiming her life, twisted his pride into something vicious. He saddled his horse. "I'm bringing her back, and Granger best not get in my way." But the sheriff did get in the way. Sheriff Tobias Granger visited Jed's cabin after hearing rumors and feeling a pull in his conscience. He found Jed cutting firewood, the rhythmic split of the axe echoing down the ridge. The sheriff warned him quietly, "Elias is coming, and he's bringing trouble in his eyes." Jed nodded, wiping snow from his gloves. "I figured. You're not looking to make a fight." "No," Jed said simply, "but I'll stand in front of them if I have to." Inside, Alara overheard. Her breath caught, not in fear, but in something deeper, an old grief rising. For so long she had been shieldless, the world taking and taking until she learned to expect pain. But now, this man, silent as a stone, steadfast as the mountain, was willing to stand in the doorway for her. Something bloomed in her chest. Not romance, not yet. Something quieter. The first fragile seed of self-worth. As the days passed, her strength returned little by little. She helped Jed stir the stew, mended a tear in his coat, brushed Myra's hair slowly each morning. These small acts felt like reclaiming her own skin, stitch by stitch. But Jed noticed the way she sometimes froze when a branch snapped outside. Trauma lived close under her skin. He didn't touch her unless she reached out first. Respect was his language, and she understood more from his silence than she had ever understood from Elias's shouting. Then, one late afternoon, as a storm gathered thick clouds above the ridge, Jed spotted movement in the trees. 3 riders, heavy horses, cold intent. He stepped back inside and closed the door quietly. "They're coming." Alara stiffened. Mira pressed against her side. Jed didn't reach for his rifle at first. Instead, he placed it gently by the wall and moved to stand near the door, his body relaxed but ready. The hoofbeats grew louder, crunching through the snow. Elias Boone dismounted before the others had even stopped moving. His face was red with fury, his breath clouding the cold air as he shouted, "Alara, you come out here right now." Jed opened the door before Elias could pound on it. He stepped out onto the snow-covered porch, blocking the entrance completely. Elias glared up at him, hatred burning in his eyes. "You think you could take what's mine?" Elias barked. Jed didn't blink. "She ain't yours. She's family property." Jed's voice cut through the wind. "She's a woman." Elias moved closer, chest puffed, hands trembling with rage. "Bring her out, or I'll go in there and drag her by the hair." Inside, Alara was shaking. This was the moment. The darkness of her past, standing only feet away. She could hide behind Jed's broad back. Let the men decide her fate. Let fear drag her into silence again. But something inside her refused. She rose to her feet, weak but upright. Mira held on her dress, eyes wide, but Alara placed a gentle hand on her daughter's cheek. "It's all right," she whispered. It's time. Then she stepped outside. Snow clung to her hair. Her breath trembled in the cold air. But her eyes were steady, more steady than they had been in years. Elias's fury faltered for a moment. Alara, get inside that saddle. Now. She swallowed. Her voice cracked, but she let it crack. She let the world hear how much courage it took to speak. No. That single word seemed to break something in the air. Even the wind paused. Elias's jaw tightened. You ungrateful. I may be bruised, she said, her voice soft but unwavering, but I am not broken, and I am not yours to own. The men behind Elias shifted uncomfortably. They hadn't expected this. Elias raised his hand as if to strike her again, but before he could, Sheriff Granger and Deacon Hale appeared behind the riders, having followed the tracks up the mountain. Sheriff Granger called out, voice strong, touch her, and I'll throw you in a cell till spring thaw. Elias turned, stunned. Sheriff, she's a citizen, a widow, and she's under my protection. You're the one we ought to question. Silence settled deep. For the first time, Elias realized he had no power here. Not in the face of law, not in the face of truth, and certainly not in the face of a woman who had found her voice. He swung into his saddle, humiliated, and spat in the snow before glaring at Alara one last time. This ain't over, but everyone knew it was. The men rode away. Snow swallowed their hoof prints as if erasing them from her story. When Jed turned back toward Alara, she swayed slightly. He stepped forward, not touching her, only offering his presence. You all right? He asked softly. She nodded, though tears glistened at her lashes. I stood up. You did, he said. You did more in that. Inside the cabin, warmth enveloped them. Mira clung to her mother in relief. Alara sat near the fire, her breath evening out, and Jed settled beside her, but not too close, leaving a respectful space that still felt like shelter. After a long, quiet moment, she reached out. Her fingers trembled as they touched the back of his hand. A simple gesture, but a profound one. Jed didn't move. He didn't pull away or look surprised. He only turned his hands slowly until their palms met, resting there like two weary souls finding the same rhythm. You ain't alone here, he murmured. Not unless you want to be. She didn't answer aloud. She didn't have to. The fire crackled softly. Outside, snow drifted down in gentle flakes, covering the world until it seemed pure again. And in that small mountain cabin, a new kind of life began. One made not of grand promises or declarations, but of steady kindness, earned trust, and simple warmth shared in the quiet. Later that night, as Mira slept curled between them and the mountain wind hummed low against the logs, Alara realized something she had never believed possible. Healing did not come with thunder. It came with gentleness, with safety, with the presence of one person willing to stand in the doorway when darkness approached. And as she closed her eyes, she felt, for the first time in years, deeply, achingly alive.